I obviously, like everybody else, am quite anxious for the pandemic to end. I know that we're all, pandemic fatigued and we're ready to return to some version of normal. I want to offer a cautionary note, though, about returning to sort of pre-pandemic normal versions of schooling that were grossly and terribly inequitable before the pandemic. And as you noted, Pedro, so many of those inequities have been exacerbated by the pandemic. So let us not be in such a hurry to return to normal, but instead to think about a new, more equitable version of schooling here in the US. I am going to insist that as we return to in-person schooling, that we pursue equity as opposed to equality. There's I agree with Bruce. Thanks to President Biden and the Biden administration, there is going to be, tremendous resources invested into pandemic recovery. And equity distribution requires us to be, mindful about communities and schools that have been hardest hit and disproportionately impacted by the pandemic. Equality would be giving every school in every school district the exact amount of resources, but every school in every district were not hit in the exact same way. We know that schools that disproportionately enroll Black, Latinx, and Indigenous students, most especially, have been extremely disadvantaged. So we got to give even more money to those schools to correct, the pandemic inequities and the longstanding inequities before the pandemic. There's a lot of conversation right now about learning loss recovery. It's a real thing. There have been students who have lost so much learning over these past 12 months. But again, students with college educated parents or parents who had the luxury and the benefit of working from home and also homeschooling at the same time, perhaps have had less learning loss. Those who had stable, reliable internet access, right, and could participate fully in virtual schooling have likely had less learning loss than have students whose parents are essential workers and who have had to work every day since the onset of the pandemic, right? Those who have not had the financial means to invest in high-speed, reliable Wi-Fi and so on. So that's one set of issues that I'm thinking about. And quickly, I'll just say two other issues that I want to make sure that we keep top of mind as we imagine sort of a post-pandemic version of schooling. We have to provide grief and emotional wellness resources. Schools and colleges and universities were terrible before the pandemic at providing the adequate amount of mental wellness and emotional wellness resources. We have to be mindful that there will be students, and they will be Black and Latinx and Indigenous students, most especially, who will return to school having lost parents and family members disproportionately, to COVID-19. We got to make sure that we have the appropriate grief and emotional recovery resources for them. And let us not also forget about our Asian American and Pacific Islander and Asian students, faculty members, and families as we return to schooling. I have been saying this since last April, that we have to be prepared to protect those Asian and Asian American students and members of our school communities as they return to schooling. We now know for sure what we knew 9 months ago, that they remain extremely vulnerable and under attack. It would be a real mistake to not have a strategy to protect those Asian and Asian American and Pacific Islander persons.